Conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome everybody to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Some new laws are taking effect with the new year. We'll take a look at what is two of the laws taking effect and how that points to how our legislature just seems to be passing laws with no overall guidance. Regardless how you feel about each law, it doesn't really matter to the fact that, well, frankly, we have some questions about why they're passing what they're passing. Lexington puts up a, I guess you'd call it new piece of art. And we'll take a look at that and see how it's funded. And also Mitch McConnell decides he wants to keep mouthing off negatively, of course, about Trump. Points to more of the case that he's not running again, of course. And that leads to questions about what should people looking to fill his shoes be doing right now if they hope to go ahead and win that seat. So we'll have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe to the show. You can head over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. And check out all the places where you can listen to the podcast. Episodes come out several times a week. Granted, last week we only put out one episode, but it was Christmas and New Year's. So hopefully you can forgive me for the lack of content there. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So longtime listeners of the show know at the time of session, this last legislative session during the spring, there was a bill that came up that got passed that banned any quote-unquote non-FDA approved vapor products from being sold in Kentucky. Now, I had on a member of the vapor product advocacy group, Vapor Store Owners Group, and we dug into that law, how it was passed, and what its effect is. And truthfully, its effect is that, well, come January 1st, many vapor shops will have to shut down or greatly change their business and hope that they can continue to survive because of this law. In fact, this is a post from one of those companies, Vapor Sticks Incorporated, said, after December 31st, almost all of the nicotine and non-nicotine vape products cannot be purchased in Kentucky. In January, we will be revamping our store. We will be selling approved nicotine products and a variety of smoke shop products. We are also picking up a variety of items to sell, possibly t-shirts and many other items. We may be changing our name soon, but you will be seeing the same happy faces taking care of you. We thank you for shopping with us since 2008, a place that has been in business for, 16 years? And hope you continue to do so. This is a court case going on in the Supreme Court where the FDA is fighting a decision made in Texas in favor of flavored vapes, and they're trying to appeal because the FDA lost to vape juice companies, and an appeal by the vaping community has been filed in Kentucky for now this second time to fight the new Kentucky law, but no word yet if Kentucky case is moving forward in time for the December 31st. Please email or write incoming President Trump to save vaping. So for those of you who missed it, what's going on here is during this past session, the legislature decided to ban any products that are not FDA approved or in the process of being FDA approved that are vapor products. What that does is that eliminates all these kind of upstart vaping companies, a lot of these vapor shops, because the only products that are currently in process with the FDA is the major tobacco companies who have submitted those. So those are, I guess, like Juul pods and Juul sticks, those kinds of things. But those like vapor juices, you just put in vapor isers, I guess, vapes. I don't know what you call it. They're no longer going to be for sale in Kentucky. So obviously that will lead to some people going across state lines, going ahead and just purchasing there. And obviously the state loses out on those tax revenues, something that our legislature claims is incredibly important. Remember, they passed sports betting because they said that all that money was just going across state lines. Whether you agree with it, disagree with it, doesn't matter. We are losing out on it. People do what they will want to do. So we want to make that money right here in Kentucky. Now, of course, they ignored the fact that that doesn't make logical sense. More people are gambling now than they were before, and that, well, perhaps we should have thought about that. In fact, recent study shows that 98 percent of people who gamble on sports betting are net losers, and about 2 or 3% of bettors make up for about 95% of all revenue on sports betting. So there's lots of people placing small bets, of course, across Kentucky that wouldn't have been gambling before, and they're losing. Now, granted, you may say, hey, look, that's a freedom issue, Andrew. They should get to do that. But I'd ask you this question. How is it that the same legislature that passes online sports betting because money is going across state lines suddenly has an issue with banning vapor products that are available for sale in all surrounding states, unless, of course, the FDA has approved them? Interesting move. Maybe you say, well, Andrew, that's just because the FDA is very important. Having that approval, of course, that's about safety for Kentuckians. Now, that kind of falls flat on its face, though, of a claim when we look at the fact that this same body in 2023 voted to legalize medical marijuana. And we'll return to that here in a second. But regardless of how you feel about medical marijuana or vaping or anything else, one thing's perfectly clear. There's no consistency here. If your concern is, well, we need to keep things legal that maybe aren't super great for quote-unquote society because of freedom and because, of course, people can go across state lines and do those items, so we're just losing out on revenue, why would you ban vapor products that they can now get across state lines but not here in Kentucky? Or if you're claiming that the FDA is super important, we need to make sure we're keeping Kentuckians safe, I would ask the question then, well, why did you approve medical marijuana, though, which the FDA has not approved marijuana for any medical uses at all? What is the guiding light here? What is the principle? In fact, it's funny, at the same time we have vapor shops shutting down, we're now getting ads, at least I've been hearing ads on the radio saying, hey, you can contact us online and go ahead and get your medical marijuana card for right here in Kentucky. Now, we can go into the various different reasons behind some of this, but it all deals with the fact that, well, who's bringing in the most money? It's not about you, the Kentuckians. It's not about a guiding light of principle or freedom or safety or government's role in your life. They don't care about that. They don't care how inconsistent it is at all. In fact, in the same exact legislative body, pretty much about 90% of the same legislators voted to ban gray machines that also voted to okay HHR slot machines. You may remember these gray machines. They're around the corner from maybe your house or some other place in the gas stations or bars. They were called quote-unquote skilled games. That made them legal without passing a new law, but they functioned a lot like a slot machine would. And our legislature decided to go ahead and all their wisdom and guiding light of knowledge ban those machines from operating, saying that they were destroying communities. Simultaneously, but just a few years prior, that same body of legislators, 90% the same, went ahead and approved HHR slot machines. That is where in Red Mile and other places where you can go in and it's considered pari-mutuel wagering somehow in the operating of it. But it's essentially a slot machine. You sit down, you pull a lever, it acts like a slot machine. And you ask, how's that? How is it that the same year that they ban gray machines because they're destroying communities because people are falling into, despair and debt and gambling away because, it's so easy, it's just around the corner, they simultaneously allow sports betting, which you can literally do from your phone. That's inconsistent as well. And there's a story behind every single one of these, and it deals with lobbyists, it deals with money, and it deals with political expedience. On medical marijuana, Beshear had, of course, went ahead and made moves to make some executive orders on that were rather kind of confusing, and the legislature had been looking at quote-unquote medical marijuana for some time. They went ahead and decided to pass a bill on it in order to save face after what Beshear did, political expedience. They did what they did on gray machines and HHR and sports betting because the horse tracks benefit from it. The horse tracks, every single sports betting company has to operate through the horse tracks. They did what they did with vaping because, quite frankly, the major tobacco companies had a larger lobbying group than the vapor shops did. But going in, though, to medical marijuana, I do want to discuss that, but we're coming up on a break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I was talking about the inconsistency of our legislature, and regardless if you agree or disagree with banning vapor products, of course, at the time the bill passed, the public arguments made, because they're never going to tell us that they only voted to ban these vapor products because the big tobacco companies wanted it to happen. No, because that would be too obvious and clear. Instead, they tried to demagogue the issue by telling you it was about protecting the children. Because children were buying these products and vapor stores are selling to children, and so we need to put them out anyways. It's destroying everything. That the greatest problem facing our high schools right now is vaping. That was an actual thing that I was told. The problem is well, those steps, if that was the real case, and maybe some legislators voted for it because they bought into that lie, and it is a lie. Because if your problem was with who's selling to underage minors, the last thing you'd want to do is get rid of the vapor shops. In fact, vapor shops, a lot like a lot of liquor stores, of course, too, as well, is actually the least likely to sell to a minor. Their entire business is based upon whether or not they have a license to sell those items. Tobacco, which is controlled by the state ABC board and local ABC boards in many cases. And of course, alcohol, controlled by the state ABC board and local ABC board. And if you sell to people underage, well, you can lose your license. You lose your entire business by doing so. So they're going to be a lot more strict. Meanwhile, gas stations, convenience stores, while they make money off tobacco and beer and as such, of course, many of the people working behind the counter are just your run-of-the-mill $10, $12 an hour, $15 an hour now, thanks Biden, employees that don't particularly care. You know, when you go into the vapor shops or other things, not that I honestly have never vaped, but you know, I've ran into people who work in vapor shops. I've talked to some of the vapor shop companies, especially with this bill going on, and there's a real passion there for the product. Of course, you hear it in their ads too all the time. And so that type of person is typically more likely to go ahead and make sure they protect the business. But meanwhile, gas station employees are far more likely to sell to minors. This isn't just hyperbole, but when you look at enforcement actions against companies for selling to minors, you will see 95% of the cases here in Kentucky are gas stations and convenience stores that are selling to minors when it comes to alcohol or when it comes to vaping products. So by shutting down these small independent vapor shops, you're not stopping the kids from being sold to. If you want to do that, you would actually, the products you just handed the market monopoly to would be the ones you'd most want to shut down from being allowed, of course, to be sold if it was just about the kids. And of course, that being about the kids makes no sense. If you're trying to keep kids from vaping, what you do is you increase enforcement of the laws to make sure stores and other places are selling to only people who can legally purchase those items. It'd be like saying that, well, you know, kids are being sold alcohol too much, so we're going to go ahead and stop everybody from drinking alcohol, including the people who can legally drink alcohol. Not to mention that when we're looking at this quote-unquote problem, you know, vaping has been around for quite some time. In the prior segment, I mentioned this Vapor Sticks company here in Kentucky that made their post about trying to make an adjustment for their business. And in it, they talked about being open since 2008. This has been a business that's been around for quite some time. What's funny is it's been around for quite some time, and I'm pretty tied in with the grassroots. I didn't really hear a whole lot of groundswell of support and push to go ahead and get past this bill to ban vapor products. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, the same body in the prior year, so it was made up from the same legislators, 2023, did pass a medical marijuana law. And I want to make this clear. It doesn't really matter how you specifically feel about the vapor law or the medical marijuana law, to my point of it doesn't make any kind of logical sense to approve one and ban the other. There's no principle there. There's no government freedom. Does the FDA matter? Does it not? Nothing. However, I do want to, like I said, pause on medical marijuana as it's going to be sold here in Kentucky starting the 1st. And the entire problems I personally have had with medical marijuana advocates is proving to be true in this case as well. Now, I'll tell you what I mean, and bear with me here, all of you listening, because I think recreational marijuana should be a separate argument from medical marijuana. However, they have become intertwined. And I'll tell you why I feel this way. I truly believe that if we're looking at situations where we'd normally prescribe narcotics, like Oxycontin or other types of addictive pain relievers, if we have an option to prescribe instead marijuana or THC in some pill form or something in those cases, I think that's worth looking at. And bear with me here, but it's hard to ignore the fact and be consistent in your principles and viewpoints if you say, I don't believe in medical marijuana, I don't want to approve it, completely don't want to approve it, but at the same time, I'm okay with the selling of opioids like OxyContin and other things as a drug for pain relief. One is, obviously, I'm not saying marijuana doesn't have dangers, doesn't have problems or anything else. I'm not one of those people who's going to lie to you about that side of things. I think marijuana has its dangers and downsides, and those who advocate for recreational use and medical use are lying to us when they try to pretend like this is a wonder drug that has no side effects. That being stated, I do believe, and I think the evidence plays this out if you look at it objectively, that marijuana is far less of a dangerous drug for treatments, medically speaking, than something like OxyContin or fentanyl or other types of Dilaudid, other types of pain relievers may be. And if there's an option for us to prescribe something less addictive or less overall harmful to somebody than an opioid, and in this case THC, then we should be able to do so. However, where this gets politically tied up is that medical marijuana has always been a stepping stone for recreational use. And that's where people, rightfully so, get a little more hesitant, I think. And that's a debate on recreational marijuana we can go into, but it's always been a much larger debate on medical than it probably should be if we are all being honest with ourselves, because people have used the medical marijuana argument as a stepping stone for recreational use instead of stopping it at medical marijuana. And that, I think, does a disservice to those who could actually benefit from that drug as a product. I think it does, because you're ending up creating a lot of pushback against the moves you make to get something approved and passed and everything else to help people in order to satiate people who want to recreationally smoke marijuana. And maybe you believe people should be allowed to do so. And I hear your arguments. I hear both sides. If I'm to be honest, I don't feel particularly strong on either side about that issue. I do feel strong about this medical marijuana thing being made a complete joke instead of being treated like a real drug that it could potentially be that could help people out. What do I mean by this? Well, right now, as I mentioned in the last segment, there are ads going on saying you can get your medical marijuana card online. There's people advertising, come see me for your medical marijuana card. And well, it wasn't sold that way. Keep that in mind. When they were selling the passage of this, it was supposed to be a limited use, limited thing in order to make it where it wasn't a stepping stone to recreational. But of course, that's not how it's working out, it would appear. It would appear it's becoming a lot more commercialized. Of course, they did a lottery handout for licenses, and very few operators are allowed to do so. So it's not like these vapor shops can now switch over to selling marijuana if they wanted to. But the other problem we have here with medical marijuana now and treating it as a stepping stone to recreational is when it comes to now buying a gun. This has been a point now of discussion, because when you purchase a gun in a gun store and you fill out your background check and you get asked a series of questions, one of the questions you get asked is if you're using any illegal substances for medical usage. And if you say, yes, I am, in this case medical marijuana, well, you're technically banned from purchasing a firearm. Owning a firearm now becomes illegal for you, and that's not really a question that's been dealt with. That's one of the reasons I've always had issue with this whole talk of legalizing recreational marijuana at a state level before anything's been done nationally. You have problems with things like banking, firearm ownership, obviously. A lot of issues there. And I think that's worth discussing in more detail. And look, when it comes to recreational, I understand all the arguments, right? I do recognize that marijuana at least is different than a lot of other drugs simply because it literally like grows out of the ground and you pick it and then you smoke it, right? Compared to things like heroin and cocaine and fentanyl and all those other things. Those are like manufactured substances that you have to, cook up or whatever. Compared to marijuana, it just grows out of the ground. So I understand that there's a little bit of a difference there of trying to make something that just kind of grows illegal. And I hear that. At the same time, I also see how, recreational use of marijuana could potentially be a problem. I've been in states where it's legal and, a lot of areas smells of marijuana. It stinks. It really doesn't add anything to society, of course, as a whole, but, it's its own arguments. The point is, is that one, my concerns about medical continuing to use people that may benefit from that as a drug option for them instead of using something more drastic like an opioid, will continue to have their pain used by individuals who actually just want recreational marijuana, and instead of having that argument have decided to use these individuals' medical situations for their own political game, and I do take issue with that. Well, here's a little small blurb. Those of you who listen to the show know that I did a show where I was talking about the Lexington solar farm, the not in my backyardism, coming out of the mayor in Lexington saying, look, we don't need solar farms here. Like, I believe in solar, but not here. Well, the state body that regulates the public utilities group, at the state level there, has given a thumbs up to solar farms being put in here in Lexington. And so we'll obviously see that be a fight to go on, of course. And it's I just always interesting to see that it's just liberals finding liberals at this point. You know, Bashir donors attacking the Bashir administration for approving solar farms, and they all say they're green energy, and here they are fighting over green energy. I find it funny. But in other Lexington news, they decided to go ahead and build a new piece of art. And the way this is funded is very infuriating. We'll have that story after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So Lexington decided it was time to go ahead and build a new piece of art through their 1% for the Arts program. And this is worth talking about because there's other cities around the state that have this in place. And first I'm going to go through this art piece and how stupid it is and a waste of money, but then talk about that specific program as it makes the least fiscal sense there is. And if it's going on in your city, you should find out right away and do something about it. So first, let me show you this piece of art here. Throwing it up for you. Those of you listening on the podcast format, I'm going to describe it to you. So it's like 3 steel girders shaped like an L but upside down, leaned against each other. So like imagine a 3 steel girder TP, and then imagine there's like a V's coming out, or not V's, but like an L of the steel girder then coming out to create like a cradle, I guess you would say. Then in the center of that cradle is something that looks like, it either looks like barbed wire, which could make some sense for where this was placed, or it's supposed to look like a bundle of sticks, and it's a nest. And then on top, it's got some like metal, 2-dimensional-esque looking flames. That really don't make sense. It doesn't match the rest of it at all in the way, like the rest of it's kind of made out of metal, very whatever, and then that is just new agey and ugly. And I mean, you know, this brash of public art just being ugly, I mean, that's been going around the country. I mean, who can forget, of course, the COVID memorial here in Kentucky, where it's got some sort of tree-esque clay golem looking figures holding silver globes up, all standing around another silver globe that's like on like a pedestal that looks like a petrified tree trunk or something, holding it up, and it looks like some sort of weird, I don't know, it looks like golems or something like people made out of clay, you know. It's truly, for lack of a better term, not to say it's like a satanic panic, but it looks pretty demonic. So that was put in place here, obviously paying with your tax dollars. We have, of course, around the country, we've had the arms hugging thing that didn't look anything like arms. I believe it's supposed to be a Martin Luther King Jr. statue. That didn't make a lot of sense. But so not to depart from that trend, of course, Lexington decided to put up what is truthfully a god-awful piece of art. And they decided to put it up at the corner of in front of the Fayette County Detention Center. And so this is out in front of Fayette County Detention Center. I drove by it the other day, in fact, and I'm pretty sure I saw some guy that was just getting out of prison peeing on it when I passed it. But anyways, I passed it, and it's called A Birth of New Hope. So I guess it's supposed to represent, and I'm just trying to pull meaning out, trying to do benefit of the doubt as best I can here. I guess it's supposed to represent the prison, and maybe that is supposed to be barbed wire, and then there's a flame arising from it, so like you can come out of prison and be a giant flame, which, I guess let's hope they didn't get thrown in there for arson, and we're encouraging their behavior. But anyways, I guess that's, if I had to read anything into it, that's what it's supposed to represent. Now, this pile of scrap cost the city $200,000 and was made by a quote-unquote artist out of Louisville, so it wasn't even done by like University of Kentucky or students there in order to provide them an art project that they could put out and put their name on, of course, add to their portfolio. No, they decided to hire a guy out of Louisville to go ahead and do it. I think it's a guy, but anyways. And this was funded, the $200,000 was funded from the 1% for the arts program. Now, it'd be one thing for somebody to donate $200,000 to pay for the statue, and all the city did was use some labor to put it up. That would be one thing. It'd be another thing if the city took $200,000 of tax revenues and went ahead and built this because, well, it would just seem wasteful. It is both wasteful and fiscally nonsensical what they've done here. Because you see, Lexington has the 1% for the arts, which mandates that any time the city sell bonds or go into debt, so when they sell bonds for a project, of course, that is them selling out bonds with a maturity date, so that is debt, or they borrow money, they have to set 1% aside of what they borrow to be spent on art projects within the city. To say that another way, the city of Lexington has an ordinance, a policy on the books that mandates they go into debt to build art projects. Mandates they go into debt to build art projects. I mean, imagine this is how you're running your household, okay? And you're sitting there having to put your water bill on your credit card or pay your mortgage on your credit card. And let's say your mortgage is, I don't know, $2,000 for easy math. And so you had a standing policy in your household that when you're in a position that you need to put your mortgage on a credit card, you go ahead and also need to set aside $20 to buy a piece of art for the house. Would that make any sense? Well, let me say it another way. Let's say you're buying a $200,000 house, and you now have a family policy that you want to tack on another 1% or $2,000 to that $200,000 loan because you need to purchase art for the house. Not a dishwasher, not a dryer, not furniture that you need, not a bed, but art. Something simply to make it look nice. Not function, but just look nice. Would that make any sense to do that in your own household? No, of course not, but this is how these places operate. It's truly not their money. This would be unthinkable. That's why we got to stop, I think, electing so many quote-unquote politicians, and we need to elect some real people. You know, people all the time are talking about, well, you know, when this next person comes up, hopefully we find somebody with experience running for office. That'd be a really good decision. And yet the experience you end up getting is the kind of experience that says we need to go into debt for art. That isn't the kind of experience I want to see. Remember when I was running for state treasurer, one of the opponents at the time was priorly the deputy treasurer and worked in government and nonprofits and so on and so forth. And well, it claimed I just have a lot of experience. I'm the most experienced person in the field. Meanwhile, my experience was owning, running a business, starting it from scratch, growing it, having 30, 40 employees. My experience, starting running a business, running my household's finances, running a company's finances. This person's experience was this, wasting your tax dollars. And yet people bought into that. Oh, that's more experienced, of course. Some people did. Obviously, he lost with a much lower percentage than I did. But the point is that people, especially politicos, thought, oh, that's a good decision. And they hear these kinds of things like going into debt to build art. And they say, that's a good decision. That's good policy. That's making government work for you. We see it at the national level, but we see it at the local level. That's why it's important to pay attention to your local elections, your local policies. Because not only do these people end up eventually running for higher office in many situations, and they take those policies with them, or they think it's a great idea to go into debt to build art, but at the same time, as well, they're wasting your tax dollars. And speaking of paying attention to who's running for office and elections and locally, it's a good time to be paying some attention to who's going to position themselves to go ahead and run for the Senate. You want to watch what they're doing, but also you want to watch what they've done priorly. Have they been there involved in a non-governmental way? Have they been involved with the grassroots? Have they donated their time, their talent, their resources? Or are they fresh onto the scene, suddenly finding a new desire to run for the people? Because, well, they suddenly decide it's time to give back. And it's worth looking at because it's pretty obvious Mitch McConnell isn't going to run again. He recently, past week or two or so, decided to mouth off again about how much he hates Trump. And that leads to a question of what are the would-be Senate candidates that are going to run for that spot. I've covered who they are before. You can go back and listen. How should they be responding? Well, we'll be discussing that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Want to reach out to the show? Feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you're back here in this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So Mitch McConnell recently, on his warpath to, of course, make sure everybody knows he doesn't like Donald Trump because, well, that's Mitch McConnell's goal at this point is just to point out how much he hates Trump. And he hates Trump not because of just Trump, but he hates Trump because of what Trump represents. And it represents a shift McConnell doesn't like. In fact, recently Mitch McConnell says that the Trump win puts Americans in a very dangerous world. What's he talking about here? Well, what Mitch McConnell has been so mad at Trump over, outside of Robert Kennedy Jr. for polio vaccine, he thinks he's going to ban the polio vaccine, and McConnell had polio or something. I don't know. But anyways, hearsay, right? When RFK is asked whether or not he's going to ban the polio vaccine, he quickly says no, he's not going to. He just wants to look at everything that has been so far settled science to see what is actually settled, what isn't, and inform the public. He's acting like he doesn't really view the FDA or any of the governing health bodies per se as a governing body to create policy, but more so as a place to simply put out information and then let individuals and states and other municipalities make the decisions about what they want to mandate or not mandate. Because that is, by the way, the separation of powers, how it works. The FDA right now puts out, and CDC put out a vaccine schedule suggested for children, and then the states go ahead and just adopt that blindly without double looking at anything in order to be mandated in order to go to the public schools. That's how that works. So if instead of the FDA putting out any kind of suggested vaccine schedule, or the CDC putting out any kind of suggested vaccine schedule, if instead they just put out information about the vaccines in general and then let states decide what they want to mandate in the public schools, that would be more proper respecting of course, the way the government's supposed to work, at least more so. Some would argue that, of course, the individual should have that decision, as that is the greatest minority, the individual. And I'm inclined to agree with him. But regardless, putting that to the side. But Mitch McConnell's also very mad at Trump because, well, he doesn't like how isolationist he is. You see, Mitch McConnell has been around since the Civil War, and he's seen the comings and goings of where everything is. In fact, he apparently has been around so long that he says this is just like before World War II. Now you may ask yourself, man, Andrew, World War II, just like it. He says the rhetoric's the same, everything else. Mitch McConnell is old. He's very old. And he got into office in 88. However, Mitch McConnell was born during World War II, I do believe. He isn't actually as old as dirt? You think he would? Yeah, 1942. Okay. Sorry, guys, I had to double check real quick. Yeah, he was born in 1942. So during World War II, he'd really just that's it. What Mitch McConnell mostly has lived through, of course, is the Cold War. And you would think that Mitch McConnell, perhaps if he wasn't a power-grubbing turtle man, would recognize what the foreign policy then brought us. They would maybe look around at places like South America and look historically at the awful, horrible dictators and the awful human rights abuses that went on there and how America funded it and approved it and actually had coups to put these people in place because we were so worried about communism that we decided instead to put in place dictators that would literally throw people out of airplanes while they were barely conscious into the ocean. That was something that really happened in Argentina, actually. U.S.-backed guy there. Anyway, so point is, thanks, Kissinger. Anyways, the point is that Mitch McConnell, you think, would learn from that and say, maybe when the U.S. meddles, we've seen how many countries die, quote unquote, die in Afghanistan for trying to go to war there, right? Russia, of course. We've seen how many countries give up on Afghanistan after trying to do nation building there, trying to build some sort of government that agrees with them, waste billions of dollars and lives in the process. But he doesn't learn from that. He's been there through all of it. Some of it he voted for. But no, instead he says, look, America can't care about just America. We can't be, quote unquote, isolationists because then Hitler will reign. That's exactly his point when he talks about World War II. He's saying that Trump will allow a Hitler to control the world, I guess. And it sounds crazy because the old coot is crazy. But of course, he's probably not running for re-election because that kind of talk doesn't get you re-elected. In Kentucky, you're old, you hate the president who Kentucky votes for in overwhelming majorities. Perhaps you should not be running for office again and lose in a ridiculous primary, which is probably what will end up happening. So that leads to a question of, we've seen some people position themselves to run, potentially Andy Barr, of course, Kelly Craft, Daniel Cameron, Nate Morris, who's, some people asked who he is. He's really in the conversation because he's a Lexington businessman. He's worth probably a couple $100 million. It's hard to tell exactly. He's had some company not do so well recently. I don't know what he's exactly worth, but he's got enough money to fund his own senatorial run. So he's a lot like Matt Bevin in that way, where he's just has his own money coming from private business. So, that's why he's getting talked about, because anybody who can dump several $1 million into the race is worthy of discussing. And when we look at those real, quote unquote, candidates, and that's what we'll call them, because I'm sure there'll be many other people that go ahead and run, but they're not going to win. They're not real candidates. And you could sit there and yell at me for saying, well, they won't run because you won't support them. But the fact of the matter is no amount of my support or your support or the 2% of Kentuckians that pay attention and vote and work and volunteer in Republican primaries will be able to offset millions of dollars spent reaching the masses that it's hard for them to reach. I mean, you can't vote for someone if you don't even know they're running, let alone what they stand for. So when we look at these more major candidates, and there'll probably be a few more that pop up, we need to be asking, what are they saying now? What have they said? And how are they positioning themselves with McConnell? Are they recognizing that McConnell's rhetoric and his claim of America needs to be involved in everything foreign while we're facing a crippling debt issue as a country? Is that something you agree with or disagree with? Do you agree with Trump or disagree with Trump? More precisely, are you willing to call out McConnell for just how awful he is and run on that? And recently, of course, we've seen Rand Paul during this Festivus going a little crazy, as he always does. He recently said this about Mitch McConnell and him leaving the Senate. He said he's got great opportunity as the keeper of the crypt, poking fun at the fact that the man is very old and he doesn't really agree with McConnell on anything. McConnell doesn't really agree with Rand on anything. And, I'm hopeful that maybe Rand is trying to fill that power vacuum, that McConnell will leave so we can get a more liberty-focused legislature at the state level, because, of course, McConnell had a lot of hands in that. So we hope maybe Rand gets more involved there, lower down. That's what I mean by power vacuum. But these candidates that are coming up, looking at what they've said before they decided to run for office, that is so key. Because these candidates will run away from anything they said prior to being in office that may not be so good. If they're smart before they've even said they're running, they've probably tried to scrub their Twitters and scrub their Facebooks of anything that they think would look bad. If they're not so smart, they may go ahead and try to leave it up there. If they're really dumb, they'll just delete everything they've ever said, so that way everybody can be like, why'd you delete your entire Twitter when you went to run for office? Is it because, of course, you're running away from something, certainly worth discussing? But I do think that's key. That's my piece of advice to you. You know, when you're looking at who to vote for in a primary where everybody's got an R next to their name and you're trying to be informed, whether it's a local level or Senate level, federal Senate, federal, even president. Ask what were they doing politically before they ran for office. If the answer is nothing, they're literally just questing for power. They literally just want power. And normally those people will try to say something like, well, I just decided it was time to give back and serve by running for office, which is a funny way of serving. It's like saying, I'm so amazing that my public service is to lord over you like a dictator. But anyways, I rest my case. I'm just pointing that out. As you see McConnell voicing this and doing these things, and you're starting to talk and hear from Senate candidates, if you have the opportunity to ask them a question, please ask them, how do you feel about Mitch McConnell? And if they aren't direct and straightforward, maybe you need to be more careful about who McConnell's backing in the Senate race, because who knows? He could be backing the person who's trying to make it sound like they don't hate him too much, but maybe just a little bit. Because he is aware that, of course, he's disliked, and McConnell's more than willing to use that. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank you all so much for joining me. Back here later this week. Hope you have a great rest of your day.